Today we're going to be talking about infectious diseases. So here's what you need to know about infectious diseases. They are caused by microorganisms. The word micro, right off the bat, means so small that you cannot see it unless you use a microscope. So these are something that you're not able to see. They're invisible basically to us. They are possible to see using high-powered microscopes. Before we had microscopes, people did not know that germs existed, and they weren't entirely sure why people got sick. Like especially as sickness spread, there was all sorts of theories about how it transferred from one person to another, and this was before germ theory became about. So these microorganisms are often also called pathogens. They live in or on humans, animals, plants, and the term that they are also referred to as is communicable diseases. So make sure that you write that down. That infectious means communicable because it's kind of like the root word to communicate is to transmit information from one person to another. And in this sense, the disease is what's transmitted from one living thing to another. So I'm sure you can think of some examples of infectious/communicable diseases, but then there's also non-communicable diseases, which we'll talk about next, which is disease that cannot be spread. So here are some examples, right? A disease that is communicable would be pneumonia. So you can catch pneumonia from somebody else. Same thing with the flu. Same thing with strep throat. Obviously, the most, I'd say, popular, other than the flu, the one that everyone knows now about is COVID-19 or the coronavirus. So, of course, the coronavirus is caused by a virus. Pneumonia is caused by a mixture of bacteria and viruses, and strep throat is caused specifically just by bacteria. So if you have a disease that's caused by a bacteria, you can treat that by something called antibiotics. So the antibiotics will basically start to kill the dangerous bacteria that's inside of you. And if you were given antibiotics, it's really important that you take all of the antibiotics. What some people wind up doing is that they'll only take it for like maybe if they're supposed to take it for 10 days, they'll take it for 5 days, half of that, because they're supposed to feel better. Because a lot of those negative bacteria, the bad ones, have been killed off. But here's the problem. The ones that are resistant to that, the ones that haven't gotten killed yet, they start to reproduce. And now all of a sudden you have a lot more bacteria inside of you that's now resistant to that antibiotics. And that's not good. That's not what you want. So just make sure that you follow the directions if you get that from a doctor. Now, from a virus standpoint, you can't really take an antibiotic to fight off a virus. It doesn't work that way. But what you can do is you can get a vaccine. So a vaccine works by preventing you from getting the virus in the first place. Basically, you have an immune system. It's like these warriors, these soldiers that are protecting you from outside things that can come in and hurt you. But they don't always know what's dangerous and what isn't. They get confused sometimes. Like they could see pollen and be like, oh no, this is a dangerous invader. We need to protect ourselves from that. Meanwhile, it's not really anything bad for you. It can be really bad for you because your own body is protecting against it. But the virus, what happens is if you get a vaccine, it's almost like you get a wanted poster for that. So if you hold up the wanted poster, right? So if this had a person's face on it, it's like, this is what the disease looks like. If you see it, make sure that you are able to attack it. And now your body knows to look out for that. So they will go and they'll attack it, and they have like the blueprint for it already. So that's why vaccines are so incredibly important. If there's any vaccines that you can take that's recommended by your doctor, you should absolutely be taking them. If you do not take vaccines, you are putting yourself at grave risk for reviving diseases that we should have eradicated, that we should have gotten rid of already. Another thing is that there's people that depend on us for that. There are some people that are called immunocompromised, which means that they cannot take a vaccine without getting dangerously sick. And they're also at risk of the disease. So if you take the vaccine, if everybody let's say in our class, if everybody is vaccinated in our class except for one person because that person is immunocompromised, they are protected because you act as like a barrier to them. Because when you go out there, let's say you go to Disney World, you're not going to catch any diseases from there because you have the vaccine. So if you come back, you don't have to worry about transmitting that to the person that is immunocompromised. So their lives depends on you getting vaccines. It's so important that you get them. And I know there's some misinformation out there that vaccines can cause problems. There's no reputable doctor that says that anymore. There was one doctor that said that, and he has since rescinded and taken back what he originally said. So I can't emphasize enough how important and life-saving and just a miracle that vaccines are. Now, for non-communicable diseases, ones that cannot be spread, there's diabetes, lung cancer, and heart disease, meaning that if I had any of these diseases, if you came near me, I can't transmit them to you in any way. Those are instead caused by your genetics, so just the genes that are passed on through your family. It could be your diet could lead to that. It could be lifestyle choices such as like smoking. So all of those things can exacerbate or make worse your symptoms for non-communicable diseases, different than communicable ones, which is what we're going to be focusing on. So signs and symptoms of disease. Signs are just evidence of a disease that can be outwardly observed or measured. So somebody else can look at you and be like, oh, wow, I can measure that you have a fever. I can see that you have a clear cough, like a dry cough, let's say. I can see that your pulse is beating abnormally. Somebody else can tell that. So notice like a fever and the dry cough were two symptoms for the coronavirus. And if you don't have those, they did not want to test anybody for it because there's a lack of testing for it. Meanwhile, if you have those two things, you're reaching the threshold for what they consider like safe to test or likely that you would potentially have it, even though you could have it without it. Now, symptoms are something that are sensed by the sick person. So if you say, I am in pain right now, well, nobody else knows what your pain is. That's actually why they came up with the scale. They call it the pain scale of 1 to 10. So if you go in there and they say, well, how does it hurt on a scale of 1 to 10? You could be like, well, it's really only more like a 3 or a 4. And they'll know it's not like life-threatening right now. Whereas if you go in there like it's a 10, they'll know that it's more of an emergency, that they have to do something right away. Same thing with like shortness of breath. It's not something that can be measured by a doctor, but you can talk about how you're not really able to breathe as well as you normally could. So that would be a symptom. Talking a little bit more about viruses, they're pathogens that infect cells. They cannot reproduce or grow on their own. So that's what's so weird about viruses. They're not technically alive, but they act as if they're alive because they reproduce and they spread. But they only can exist if they have a host to infect. So that's why they're not really considered life, because without other things that are living, they wouldn't exist. They're very, very, very small. They can't even be seen with ordinary microscopes, and they cause all sorts of illnesses like the flu, like the common cold even. And they constantly evolve and they change. So when you have, let's say, the flu shot, the flu goes on and it's really good in cold weather and it infects as many people as it can because it wants to spread. In fact, it wants to spread so badly that that's why it causes you to sneeze. It causes you to sneeze or to cough, and when that happens, you're spreading those droplets in the air and then other people get into contact with them. So it basically is tricking you in a way to potentially spread it, and that's why it's so important to cover your mouth and to not spread those droplets as best you can and always be washing your hands because it's trying to infect other people. But it in itself is not alive. So everyone knows about the common cold and influenza, which is the flu, which are notorious viral diseases. Some lesser known but important viral diseases. There's chickenpox, there's mumps, measles, rubella, shingles, herpes, HIV and AIDS, HPV. A lot of these are ones that as a baby you can get, or as a young kid, you can get vaccines for to help prevent you so that you never have to get a lot of these ones. The flu changes so much because it is constantly moving around the world. So that's why you need a new flu vaccine, because it evolves. If you take last year's flu vaccine, that's not necessarily going to help you for this year's flu because it's evolved since then. And in fact, the flu never really goes away. The flu virus, I was talking about this before, it infects everyone in the cold weather right now. But then like when the warmer weather comes around, it's not easily able to transfer as much. But at that point, it has moved south and now it's going into like South America, right? And Australia and other places where it's colder weather there now, or the opposite. So when it's our hot weather, it's their winter, and then it's able to spread all throughout the other part of the world. And then by the time it's cold again, it comes back to us, and now it's evolved and it's changed. So that's why viruses are so crazy and pernicious and able to spread so easily like that. And of course, the now very well-known viral disease that is also caused by a virus is, of course, the coronavirus, the COVID-19. The reason it's called coronavirus is, of course, because just the way that its shape, it kind of looks a little bit like a crown. So that's what corona means, crown. And that's really the only reason that's called that. And it's unclear what the full extent of coronavirus will be. Will it be similar to the flu, where it keeps sticking around, or will one vaccine protect you from it? If you get it once, can you get it again? All of these things are still to be determined.